Now we're talking about designing the diverse and inclusive product. I don't think it's much of a misnomer, but that name might have not been very clear. But hopefully we'll get into exactly what I'm talking about and hopefully the useful content that is on this talk. Cool. So kind of want to give a brief forward before we start. This is a huge topic and touches almost all parts of our business. As a result, this talk doesn't really cover everything and isn't about accessible implementations in code. I know a few people were confused about that. I think that I was going to tell you some nice tags and did some cool stuff. Not doing that. There was already a great training on this if you guys haven't seen it. And I'm also probably not the most qualified person to talk about this. Interests me, really excited about, really passionate about how we can have more of a good product, but I am an engineer. I'm not exactly the most experienced at reading team. Yeah, promoting these sorts of things. But I'm excited to share what I've learned. Cool. Let's go into what we're covering. What is inclusive technology? What is inclusive design? They are different. So we're going to some failures in design, how people aren't inclusive. The benefits of an inclusive culture, the benefits of inclusive products. There's a time cost argument, which is the main challenge to inclusivity. We'll have a discussion around disability, and then we'll go into the market around disability. We'll talk about team diversity for a bit, focus on small businesses and having inclusivity and accessibility as a small company. Then we'll talk about design thinking, which is sounds a bit like a tangent, but it's also kind of relevant and I like it. Changes that we can make as a company, inclusive design patterns, which is a bit tech-based, so the only part I'm probably crossing over is that slide, and terms that you can use. Something as well before we start as well is please do just interrupt if you have a question. I'm not sure how long this will take, but I don't think it'll be ridiculously long. Famous last words. But yeah, please just do interrupt if you have any questions or something isn't clear. Cool, so let's get started. What is inclusive technology? Anyone in the room want to hazard a guess? No, nice, safe option. So, inclusive technology is technology that is accessible by people from different backgrounds and communities. Questions that you want to ask yourself when you're thinking about the accessibility and inclusivity of the technology that you're creating, the product that you're creating, is who's excluded and why they're excluded. And what steps are we taking as a team to include awareness for those groups and mitigate issues that are created by us not making those considerations? It can pertain to accessibility, diversity, anti-racism, and much more. I think there's a whole bunch of things that are included in this branch that's not abundantly clear. I don't think I probably won't have a whole holistic explanation of everything because I'm not as good as other people explaining these sorts of things, but there's a whole bunch of different branches there, inclusivity and accessibility and diversity. In contrast, what is inclusive design? Rather than being technology, inclusive design is design that takes into consideration a variety of human differences. It's not about creating a particular technology, it's about the stage beforehand of designing something, whether that be a particular product or service, anything really, even a team, that takes into consideration people's different backgrounds and communities as well. This can take people with disabilities, considering them, which is the accessibility front, which is most people think about off the top of their head, but other human differences we have: race, gender, religion, age, location, for example, even something like access to a laptop, which we'll get into. That doesn't sound like something that is a difference in inclusivity, but we'll get into what that kind of means. What really excited me and sparked me to get into this conversation was a talk that I listened to on LinkedIn. That sounds really lame, and I've never listened to a talk on LinkedIn before. But it was actually really good. It was by consultants, fun. But they had a really good white paper. It's by Capgemini, and they had some really good talks where they interviewed a bunch of different tech employees, and in particular, they interviewed women and ethnic minority employees in tech functions. And there's a whole bunch of different results and answers to questions that they had. These are ones that are actually quite similar, and I thought these were quite interesting to highlight. But there's actually really shows in their talk that there's a huge discrepancy between the idea of how inclusive the tech leadership team thinks they are and how inclusive ethnic minority groups in the tech team think that their company do. This is a different point that I really don't cover in the topic, but I think having clear communication and understanding and almost similar ideas between your leadership and the people and the grassroots, I'm going to say, it's probably a bad phrase, is really important to make sure that your company is aligned in values, make sure people feel like their voices are heard. I think we all have heard of situations where you feel like the people at the top of the tree are kind of out of touch with your everyday work. I don't think that's an issue here, but we're a small company, and this does happen in different phases. What I really wanted to tackle on was, you see the third one there, our digital products are inclusive of gender and ethnicity-based considerations. Both all tech employees and women, ethnic minority employees, like that, agree at like 17% only think that the thing that they're building is inclusive of ethnic and diverse backgrounds. This is really, really low, something that I think we can really work on. So hopefully this training can highlight a few things that we can use to improve that. But basically, when it's not really in the best state in terms of people thinking products are inclusive of the whole of the community. We'll get into one now. Okay, some failures of design. We'll talk about this. Some of these are UK-based. People who aren't in the UK, I'm sorry. We'll get into that. This isn't UK-based, it's everything. Originally, airbags were designed, the design of them failed to protect women. That's because during testing, they only tested it on men, and not considering the different anatomy that a man and woman had, airbags just were not safe for women to use. So car crashes happened, men were kept safe and women died. This was a huge oversight in terms of uninclusive design, something that could have been considered. That's quite an old example, it's obviously been rectified. But there are more modern ones. The UK government a few years ago released a passport photo tracker, and it failed to recognize darker skin. It sort of tells you, okay, is this photo viable as a passport photo? And often for people with darker skin, it would say no, retake it, take another one. But for lighter skin, it would say no, your photo's fine. So, and this was still rolled out. That's the main issue. This was actually highlighted in testing. They did early stage testing with communities, and people realized that there was this discrepancy between skin colors, but the government still rolled out this product anyway, which is a really interesting thing to highlight is, okay, think of it on the other thing. If this was something that had discrepancies towards light-skinned people, would this product even have been rolled out? And it really showed biases in a lot of the people who are making decisions when a product is released. Here's a sort of discrepancy. You can see there was quite a big difference between women of darker skin, women of light skin, yeah, light skin people like that. Any questions? Any thoughts? No?
Yeah. How do you make, obviously the argument, like, I think that shouldn't have gone out. And how do you make the argument that that's not MVP, that that's like working sufficiently?
How do you make an argument that's not MVP?
Like,
no, I think that's a really valid concern. Like, and I think this is the main argument that people have is, okay, this is MVP, this is the situation, this is a thing we built, and we have a crunch time, we can't be as accessible as we want to be. And I think there is a valid argument in some cases, but in the vast majority of instances, that isn't I have something to do, I'm not going to put in the extra work to make it more accessible. It's actually a failure at the beginning of design and the thinking about your product to include those people in the conversations. Often it's as a result of people who are coming up with a product not being inclusive enough. And making your product more accessible and more inclusive won't actually take any more time or won't cost anything more. It's just as a result of people not being included throughout the process. So we'll get into that later, but yeah, I think that is probably the main concern as to why we won't be as accessible as we possibly can be, which we'll discuss later. Cool. Let's talk about the benefits of an inclusive culture. Hopefully I don't have to sell this too much to you guys. Inclusive companies are twice as likely to be innovative leaders in their sectors, with individual employees being 83% more innovative. Interesting measure, but I saw loads of different studies that were going on this. This is actually the more conservative one. There were studies that were saying inclusive companies are 4 times more likely, into some more stats that we'll go into as well. A more ethnically diverse leadership team and a higher proportion of women in the workforce is correlated with more profits. There was a study done in 2009 that showed the most ethnically diverse leadership teams had 15 times more profit than their equivalents without an ethnically diverse group. So business-wise, if you're listening to that, it sounds like a no-brainer, right? Organizations with more inclusives are 2 times as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 3 times more likely to be high-performing, 6 times more likely to get innovative and agile, 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. So those are all really good signs of innovation and entrepreneurship and high performance really does come and is championed by diversity. We'll kind of get into ideas as to why I think that is the case, but there is a clear scientific sign that diversity does lead to better business performance as a company as a whole. Cool. Benefits of inclusive products. This is different from a company culture that actually designs something and the product itself being inclusive of the groups. A solution that's designed through inclusive practices tends to have 4 distinct benefits. Increased access. I think that's fairly simple. It captures a larger market. That's a better thing. Also, more people can use it. It's overall good. Reduce friction. By making something more accessible by people, it tends to be simpler, it tends to be easier to use, tends to be more intuitive. As with people that really care about a good UX and a good experience for the end consumer, having these sorts of accessibility considerations really do just lead to us generating better products. Improved emotional cues. What this means is you are more in touch with your user as well, someone who's more accessible. So if you are considering other groups, the fringe members of your target audience, a lot of the times you're not listening to and not solving the problem for those communities, and therefore you'll tend to not be solving the problem as much. You're not listening to those emotional cues, you're not solving the problem for them individually, leading to a better experience usually. And be net positive people. What that generally means is you're solving a problem for a wider group of people, you're a bigger value add as a whole. Cool. Next one. So this is the time cost argument. I think this is like the question that was raised before. And the biggest challenge to inclusivity and accessibility is that it takes more time to make sure that you hear a diverse range of voices in the design process and have a diverse team. Usually people say, okay, yeah, we want to have all these accessibility additions to our product, but this is going to take some time. We're crunched. We have something to deliver in 2 weeks. We will work with a consultancy. We kind of have that problem, right? But I think that throughout looking at this isn't really something that is, okay, this is crunched. We can't actually do this. This is, we haven't taken steps preemptively to actually solve this problem. So we've kind of led down a line where we haven't thought about these considerations until it's too late. Yeah, and as it says here, there's actually no evidence that it takes more time, costs more, and is more difficult to implement more accessible products. It takes, and what I'm saying, what it does take is it takes work, and it's as though, early on, basically what it's about is making sure that you have these considerations early on during the design process. And I think we'll get into how we think we can achieve that, but I think a big part of that is like the diversity of the team who is going through that design process as well, and the diversity of thoughts. Cool. Let's have a brief aside on disability, because I suppose this is what people think when they think of inclusivity and accessibility, but I'll kind of explain the ideas of disability because it's not just a split part of what we think it is. The key to inclusive design isn't about process or tools, but awareness and intentionality. What we mean by that isn't about adding a process or adding tools or making something happen in your team that we do on a weekly basis. It's about awareness of those, awareness of how we can be more inclusive and intentionality to solve those problems and make what we have more inclusive. There are 3 different types of disability in this concept. There's permanent disability, there's temporary disability, and there's situational disability. Those aren't abundantly clear, but we'll get onto those on the next slide. Yeah, we'll see. We'll leave it for that. Disability is context dependent. Sorry, not typo. Yeah, what it means by that is disability isn't always I am physically blind. There's also situations, say you're out in the sun and there's a bunch of glare coming from the sun, you can't see your phone. That thing counts as a form of disability. It's a temporary one. It's a situational one. And the interesting thing here is design for permanent disability solves for other groups. Loads of big enterprises actually implement this, where they kind of design for the fringes of their community. So design for someone who is permanently disabled, say you permanently blind, sorry. Say you solved to create a product for them and something that solves a problem for them. By creating a product that helps, is more accessible to people with vision impairment, you're solving a problem for people who are partially sighted. You're solving the problem for people who are in that situation, like I said, when it's really sunny day and you can't see too clearly. You're solving multiple problems for bigger communities just by solving for that extreme scenario. Yeah, there's solving blindness improves areas for visibility. Here's another example. If you're designing pavements and you're trying to make it more accessible for people with wheelchairs, you're also helping people with strollers, bicycles, skateboards, loads of other things on with a trolley coming from a supermarket. Solving for all of those cases by being more accessible. Yeah, just to explain the different versions of permanent, situational and temporary disability, here's some examples. Touch, say you have one, say you're one arm, you've lost an arm. Say someone has an injured arm for a temporary one, that's a temporary disability, and say you're a new parent, so you're carrying a child. Those are all different forms of disability in not having one arm available, but they're all different versions of it. Sight, someone who's blind, someone with cataracts, and someone who is a distracted driver. Those are all situations, and you can think of the driver as someone who is their vision impaired because they can't access something visually. They can't look away from the road. Speech, you have someone who is nonverbal, is mute, cannot speak. Someone who's ill with laryngitis, so temporary, cannot speak. And someone who has incredibly heavy accents, so they're difficult to understand. Those are all different versions of speech impairment in some way. And hearing, deaf, someone who's deaf, someone who has an ear infection, and maybe someone who's a bartender in a club, they can't hear things going on around them. So it's just good showing that if you design for those permanent disabilities, someone one arm, blind, nonverbal, or deaf, you are actually solving for all of those other communities as well. And it's a much bigger market that you're capturing than just designing for what you imagine to be a small percentage. Okay. And I think that's a really interesting thing as well. It's actually not a small market, the disabled community. In the UK, there are 7 million people of working age with a disability. The value of that market is 212 billion. So this isn't like you are solving and making no profit. There's actually a monetary incentive to solve a problem for people with disabilities as well as the large population. It's also not even including friends and family of those people who would be more cognizant of accessibility. Those people would care about these things as well. And when we think about accessibility, we tend to focus on physical disability. There's other forms, there's non-visible disability as well. And yeah, like I said earlier, this can be as simple as someone who isn't a native speaker. It's also, what I'm focusing on here is this market that you're capturing when you're improving accessibility and inclusivity to all that disability I've been talking about here momentarily. But we also don't count for gendered and racist designs. You're actually capturing a larger market by being more accessible to those communities, and those communities are even larger. Cool. Let's talk about something that I think is really important. The team reflects the product. I think this is one of the biggest things that is leading to a lack of inclusive design and accessible design, is the fact that us as developers, people who implement things, don't reflect those communities or aren't aware of those communities. It's not an active decision that we're making, it's just an unawareness on our parts. Homogeneous tech teams tend to homogeneous products. We don't ask all the questions we need to solve problems for our customers. What we mean by that is, if we're all from the same background, say, vast majority of us here are from middle class backgrounds who went to university, studied a technology degree and came straight here from university, right? We all have a fairly similar background. We tend to have homogenous thoughts. We tend to have homogenous products. That's kind of what it leads to as a result of that lack of diversity. You don't have a lack of diversity and innovation in that product. That's why companies with the highest diversity tend to be the most innovative, because you have challenging ideas. You have innovation that breaks the mold. Yeah, so as a result, diversity of background is a critical way for us to build better products. Hopefully that's fairly self-explanatory. What I mean by this is, it's a challenge. We naturally relate to people who are similar to us. This is more around the hiring and thinking about someone as being a good fit for your company. Most of us here are related in some way to the hiring process for the company. And I think it's a really difficult thing to separate yourself from your natural biases. We tend to think of someone who is a cultural fit to the company. It tends to be someone who's more similar to us. And I think something that is really important to do and a really difficult thing to do is to challenge our own biases and be like, okay, this person might not be on the top of my head a cultural fit, but what is that? Just a cultural fit because of our background, cultural fit because of who we are as an individual, not really someone who is probably really valuable to the company that we're maybe overlooking because of those different cultural differences. Yeah, awareness of bias and challenge our cultural fit. That's really what I'm trying to say in this way, where you can have a more diverse team and solve problems better. I think this was a really awesome explanation of how you build inclusive technologies in one of the talks that I listened to. It says building inclusive technology and solutions has an intrinsic relationship with how people from diverse backgrounds within the tech team feel in the workplace. An improved sense of belonging and community for teams, people will lead to better technological outcomes and solutions. There's in the same talk, in the same sort of white paper, I don't know what the technical term is, that sort of shows the opinions of people from different backgrounds in work and tech. It showed that a vast majority of them also feel like they are either underrepresented or they feel less empowered to make decisions and make actions in their tech, which is a bad thing as well. And I think a really important thing is to empower people from diverse backgrounds to feel like they can challenge the status quo of what we're doing. That's the guy. That's people sorry around there. Cool. Yeah, I think a lot of the focus for diversity and inclusion has come from a lot of enterprise companies. So you like Microsoft or Oracle, you have a big like research group who works purely in diversity, but this can work for small businesses as well and can be really impactful. And this is all about the key for inclusive design. It's not about process or tools, but awareness and intentionality, like I said. It's talking to a wider audience. I think a lot of people, when they say, oh, you're going to come up with an MVP, really hammer home on a really big niche. I think what you can do when you talk that niche, really think, okay, how can it be accessible as possible within that niche? Say you are building an app that's targeted towards younger generations. You might not interview someone who's like 65 because they might have completely different use cases and might not be as interested in your product. But say you diversify as much as you can within the niche that you're focusing. I think that's a really important thing to do, just to avoid that sort of homogenous customer feedback as well as the homogenous team issue that we talked about earlier. And this is what I meant before about including someone on the fringes of your community group. In your target audience, talk to the most excluded person. So who's on the periphery of your target audience? Have a conversation with them and see how you can solve problems for them. And by talking to that person who's the most excluded, you get the whole spectrum of the people from the most excluded to your sort of exact target market. You solve a lot of problems for them along the way. So really solving that problem for the most excluded person in your niche really helps solve a lot of problems for your business and make the most impact and value in the least amount of time. Build better problems. Yeah, and what I mean by this is a lot of this, the whole idea of finding that audience, that diverse audience, and solving a problem for them really aligns a lot with how a lot of companies have come up with ideation and kind of product market fit. It kind of follows that sort of standard process of establishing a market demand. You establish the market demand of that person who is excluded. You develop the skills in the team to meet that demand, and you answer that demand. You're basically finding a problem, you're establishing a team who can solve that problem, and then you solve it. This kind of is product market fit in a way. You're kind of helping it establish a larger product market fit by solving a problem for that distinct user, that person who is in that excluded group in your community, and helps build even more robust product that resonates with them better. Sorry, any questions before I do? Cool. Let's talk about advice from enterprise. Basically, the reason why I want to include slides is I think a lot of enterprise companies have great advice for how you can approach design in an accessible and inclusive way. I think, like we're saying, a lot of these will be the same. We recognize exclusion. Designing for inclusivity not only opens up a product or service to more people, but also reflects how people really are. All humans grow up over the world around them, and we want our designs to reflect that. Basically, you are acknowledging that exclusion, you're trying to solve a problem for that group. Solve one extent to many. This is what I meant before of solving that one excluded group. You kind of cover that whole wide array of people who were partially disabled or something like that. You are solving for that whole larger group by going for that person on the edge of your community. And also learning from diversity. Exactly what we were saying before, from a diversity of thought, by having a diverse customer base and having a diverse team, you're basically going to catch more ideas and ways that you can build your product better. And I think that's the most important thing. Really establishing, okay, from the get-go, how can we figure out as much as we can for the best product we can do and build in that way, in that iterative way, and make sure those people, that diverse group, is always there and asking feedback, is always there in the ideation process. Really involving them throughout the journey is the most important way to build diversity. Cool. This is a small side of design thinking. I don't know if you guys have heard of it much, but I think it's probably the best way to build a really good product that solves a problem. So this is a nice little pipe circular chart that explains it. It kind of has 6 stages. So empathize. This is when you conduct user research and basically find, okay, what is my user? What are the problems that they're having? Talking to people, figuring out their problems effectively. Defining, that's narrowing down your that user research into something that you can actually solve. And yeah, establishing that user problem exists. Ideate, that's coming up with a solution to that problem that you've just defined. Prototyping, building an MVP, testing something to solve that problem. Testing that, checking it against your users, and implementing it. That's getting out there, building a full product, something that actually solves a problem for people. And that's kind of the iterative process in design thinking. I kind of split up in 3 ways if you want to simplify it. It says understand, explore, materialize. That's the way I tend to visualize it. And I think there's some emotions that really associate with these 3 groups as well. Understanding is all about empathy. It's about empathizing with your user. And I think that's what this whole talk really is about. It's having empathy for users and the people who are using your product and really understanding what life is like for them. Exploration is about creativity, coming up with solutions to actually solve a problem that someone's having, being that person who's listened to a bunch of people, figured out what things you can solve, and be creative enough to really test those out. And last one is delivery. That's testing and actually delivering on the thing that you have created and actually getting a product that solves a problem. I think the whole idea of the place where having diverse thoughts and inclusion really comes into that empathy side. At that first stage, that is where you really need to empathize with those people from different groups, and that's where you have the most impact when you're designing a product. It's all about making sure that you are empathizing with those people who are currently being excluded from that group that you're building your product for. Cool. On that, let's think about actual tangible changes that we can make. I don't think too many of these are hot takes, but please do throw some out if you guys have any ideas as well. I said this in a few seconds. So change we can make in what we build. I think the key thing is changing our mentality, thinking about underrepresentation to exclusion. When you say, oh, these people are underrepresented by what we built, to they are being excluded what we built, it makes it far more proactive for us to solve that problem. It shows intentionality for us to not include those people. Underrepresentation sounds like they fell by the wayside, where in reality those people have been excluded unknowingly or not. And account for inclusivity early on, get people from a diverse background involved in conversations, and really keep them there to make sure that those responses are happening. As a small tangent, with a client that we were working on before, similar to that passport recognition for darker skin, we also had a camera that didn't recognize dark skin as well, and was actually making it kind of had filters and kind of make their faces almost completely not visible at all. And that was something where that would have been solved if they were included in conversations around how we build a better product. So that was an example from a year ago. So this problem is still really happening right now. Changes we can make to our methodology. We should challenge our standards. I think I was looking through our standards thinking, okay, how can we improve some? And I was looking at number 8. The team received real customer feedback. I think quite a lot of us don't even stick to this. But we can take this a level deeper. The team received real customer feedback, but who are we receiving feedback from? Is that group representative? Is that group diverse? Is that group really our target audience? I think we all want to make sure that we're asking questions to the right people, but that should be a diverse group of people as well, so we get as much information as we can to avoid that aforementioned homogeneity. Homogeneous design. We'll say that. Changes we can make to our team. Challenge our own concept of a cultural fit and avoid. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Homogeneity. I think it's homogeneity. I think this is really cool, and something that I think I'm really aware of as well is. I think I have a really strong idea of what's a cultural fit to me, a bit of a strong personality. So challenging my concept of cultural fit, and maybe just because I'm not resonating with someone amazingly, doesn't mean that person isn't great for the company. It might just mean that we're slightly different people. And I think being cognizant of that fact is really awesome. And create space and opportunities to guarantee voices are heard. Quite often, as a dev day-to-day, we don't really challenge things, we don't really speak about things that might be bothering us, but having open spaces, things like that is a really good place for us to be able to challenge what is going on in our group and really make sure that all of our diverse voices are heard. This is a really cool one that I don't know if is something that people aren't interested or is interested in, but learning from people outside of organization. I think we have a really strong idea of the M33 group, and we really have a strong idea for our culture, like a really strong idea for how we deliver. We have a really we have strong methodology that we stick to, But I think something we don't do, or at least I'm skeptical of doing, is not listening to people outside of our organization and bringing people from the outside in to advise us on how we can do better. Because if we don't do that, even if our methodology was good, a year or two later, it might just not be. So really just bringing people from the outside and learning from people who do well and do things differently is really important to make sure that we can build more diverse products too. Yeah, and in that vein, it's promote a culture of exploring alternatives to our status quo and empowering individuals. I think an example of that is the SLDCT doing extreme programming or pairing holiday. That's a really good idea of empowering individuals to explore different avenues in how we design this, that, or in how we build. That's a really cool idea of exploring alternatives. Some may work, some might not. But I think it's the whole idea of that experimentation, which I think is baked into our culture. But really empowering those individuals to make those changes. A3's Kaizen, they're all like that too. But really make sure that we do feel empowered as individuals and feel like we can do it. Did anyone want to answer to those? Don't know if anyone had any hot takes that they wanted to add. No, cool. Yeah, this is more technical, inclusive design patterns. I think there's probably more than this, and I don't think this is the most well-designed slide. But basically, here are a bunch of design patterns that I found that could help build a more inclusive page or a more inclusive product. Yeah, text legibility in dark mode for older users, surname inputs for global audiences, a variety of demographic identifiers, so you can identify with who you are, not just a small community, inclusive facets and filters, so that's filtering based off of your specific needs as a person from a community, diverse illustrations, and also a quick accessibility test that anyone can do. That's a really good link, which is 10 questions to make sure that what you built is accessible. It's actually really quick and really easy to be like, okay, no, what I built is kind of lacking in a few ways. So I recommend, I'll send over the slide if you guys click on that link and basically see if there's anything cool with it. Okay, beyond that, there's more tools that we can use. This is called Cards for Humanity. It's an I think it was created by Capgemini, I'm pretty sure. It's an exercise that helps with empathy. I think the name's a bit lame because I think it's like a pun on Cards Against Humanity, but it's just the antithesis of that. Not as it's like very kind of yeah, Cards for Humanity is actually a really cool thing. I think I want to, if we have time afterwards, we can go through it. It's probably overrunning, probably not. But basically, it talks about a user with a specific lifestyle, and what you do is you take your product and be like, how is our product tailored to solve a problem for them? I'll quickly click on it and show you, because I don't think that's probably clear. So if you do this, basically, Cards for Humanity, you deal cards, and it says, there's this person here, he's 60 and is very impatient and has dyslexia. And you're like, okay, how can you meet your needs with your product? So you can take your product team and be like, okay, how do we solve a problem for them, or how do we not? It might not be apparently like relevant to you, but I think if you use these and be like, how can we solve a problem for them? We can build a better product. I think what that also aligns with, I don't know if you guys do this particularly, but the use of personas is a key part of design thinking. So when you're actually coming up with your customer, you come up with their whole life. You go into probably excruciating detail about a fictitious character that you created and how your product solves the problem for them and how you're their target audience, including disability and accessibility to that sort of mix when you're creating that person is a no-brainer and something we often don't include. So saying that person has a vision in their head or something like that in some way just helps you consider that person. And it's not about having a generic blind person with no other facets about them. These are regular people with tons of different things. So actually just adding that accessibility angle to those user stories and user personas that you've already created is probably the way to go. Universal Score. This is an evaluation tool that teams can basically use to tell how inclusive they are. This is kind of like the one before, but less technical. This is basically, you basically get a quick quiz and it'll tell you how inclusive your product is. That's really helpful. And there's also design toolkits. Dropbox and Microsoft have some really cool ones. I really like Microsoft, so I'd click on this and read it if you have the time. It's really good about how to be more inclusive. And there's Oracle's approach to global design. This is more UI-based, more UX-based, kind of like their color and stylistic choices. It's actually how a lot of our design is very Western-focused and how they've also more global brand and actually looks really cool. And yeah, their colors, their UX is related to that. And there's also tons of podcasts and books. Here's one I wanted to highlight. This is actually founded by Davina, the founder of Allianz, with Diversity in Tech podcast. I listened to this and was a huge inspiration for this slide as well, so I want to give her a shout out because she actually did a really good job with the podcast, still going on. But there's tons of resources that you can bring as well. Thank you.